Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Today I will. Yesterday I already discussed about the different types of study, like the what is the analytical study, what is the descriptive study, and earlier we are already discussed about the epidemiology. What is the epidemiological study? Uh, but today I will discuss about the method of sampling. What is the sampling? Method of sampling. What is sampling? Before we will study about the sampling, first I will discuss about the what is the population and what is the sample. What is the major difference between when we are doing any kind of research? Now, first we will go through the. First we will collect the data from the population only. And what is that population? What do you mean by population? And what is the sample? Okay. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes,
Am I
ma'am.
audible, Rakesh?
Yes, ma'am.
Sample. Sample is a small group of members selected from a population to represent the to re, to, re, to represent. Sample is nothing. Sample is a small group of members selected from a population to represent in the research. What is population? Population means the group from which a sample is drawn. Population is the group from which a sample will be drawn. Exact population will be depend upon the scope of the study. Okay, the exact population will depend upon the what type of study we are doing. And what do you mean by sampling? In the research work now we have to collect the data in the different method. What is sampling? Sampling is a method that allows the researchers to interfere information about a population based on result from, and that is called as the sampling. Sample is the very minute representation and selected from a very large group or the aggregate. In other words, sample provides the specimen pictures of a large whole, but population is a very large whole is termed as the population or the universe. In research, we will define group that may consist of individuals, object, or the characteristics of the human beings also. And there are mainly different types of, broadly the sampling is divided into two types. One is the probability sampling and the another one is the non-probability sampling. What is the probability sampling? Probability sampling is based in the fact that every members of a population has a known and equal chance of being selected. That is called as the probability sampling. Means ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ କିଛି ଖେଳୁଛନ୍ତି ଗୋଟେ କଏନ କୁ ଆମେ ଉପରେ ପକଉଛନ୍ତି ତ କଣ ହଉଛି, ଗୋଟେ ତାର ଏଇଦର ହେଡ୍ ଆସୁଛି ଅଦରୱାଇଜ ଟେଲ୍ ଆସୁଛି, ତ ଏଥିରେ 50-50. ତ ଯେତେବେଳେ in the probability sampling we will select the data 50-50. That means probability sampling is mainly based on the fact that each and every member of the population has a known and equal chance of being selected. That is called as the probability sampling. And what is the non-probability sampling? Non-probability sampling, it mainly involves non-random selection based on the convenience. Okay, it involves the non-random selection based on the convenience. That is called as the non-probability sampling. You just remember that sampling is mainly broadly divided into two types. One is the probability sampling and the other one is the non-probability sampling. And the probability sampling is again divided into mainly four types. One is the simple random sampling, second one is the systematic sampling, third one is the cluster sampling, and the fourth one is the stratified sampling. Probability sampling is mainly divided into four types. You remember this one? First one is the simple random sampling, second one is the systematic sampling, third one is the cluster sampling, and the last one is your stratified sampling. What is that simple random sampling? Simple random sampling is nothing that probability, it is the one type of simple random sampling is comes under your probability random sampling, and these probability random sampling in which the every members of each study population has an equal chance of selection. And in the systematic sampling, you have to, the first element is selected randomly from a little or from a sequential filler, and then every ninth of the element is selected. That is means you have to select the sample only systematically, systematic sequentially. That is called as the systematic sampling. And what is the cluster sampling? Third one of the probability sampling is called as the cluster sampling. And what is that cluster sampling? In cluster sampling mainly this type of procedure that mainly involves randomly selecting the cluster of element from a population and subsequently selecting the every element in each selected cluster for inoculation in the sample. Okay, that means in the cluster sampling, you have to mainly it is the procedure in which the mainly it involves the you have to select the data, you have to select the sample randomly selecting the cluster of elements from the a group of population and subsequently selecting every elements in each selected cluster for the inclusion in the sample. That is called as the cluster sampling. And the last one is in the probability sampling, the last type of sampling is called as the stratified sampling. What is the stratified sampling? Stratified sampling in stratified sampling is the procedure. It mainly involves dividing the population in the groups or the strata. Strata is nothing. Strata means a group of population defined by the presence of certain characteristic and then randomly sampling from each stratum. That is called as the stratified sampling. What is the non-probability sampling? The non-probability sampling means you have to select that non-probability sampling is again divided into different types. First one is the convenience sampling. What is the convenience sampling? In the convenience sampling, mainly it involves the selecting the sample based on the convenience way. You have to select the sampling in your convenience way. That's why its name as the convenience sampling, and it is also called as the accidental sampling. The convenience sampling is otherwise called as the accidental sampling. And the next type of non-probability sampling is your snowball sampling. What is the snowball sampling? Snowball sampling is select the samples and ask them to refer them to ask them to refer them to it is the network group of sampling that is called as the snowball sampling. This snowball sampling is the non-probability types of sampling. And what is the quota sampling? This quota sampling is also comes under the non-probability sampling. And that quota sampling is mainly means to take every tailored sample that is that in the population to same characteristic or trials of the population. That is called as the quota sampling. And quota sampling is the non-probability types of sampling. And the last type of non-probability sampling is called as the purposive or the judgmental sampling. The last type of sampling is called as the purposive sampling or the judgmental sampling. It is the non-probability types of sampling. In the purposive or the judgmental sampling, mainly selecting the sample based on his or her own judge. Okay. In this type of sampling, now you have to selecting the samples based on his or her own judgment. That is called as that's why its name is the judgmental sampling, or it is otherwise called as the purposive sampling. This purposive sampling is otherwise called as the judgmental sampling, and this judgmental sampling is the non-probability types of sampling. Mainly in the sample is a very miniature representation of and selected from a large groups or aggregates. Mainly, the sample provides a specimen picture of a large whole. This large whole is termed as the population. The large whole is termed as the population or the universe. And uh, mainly, it divides into different types of groups also. Representativeness and the adequacy of the sampling. Mainly, basically, there are two requirements of the sample. One is the representativeness and the another one is the adequate. What is the representative? Representative means the proportion of the population. The population may contain a finite number of members or units. Sometimes the population may be infinite also, or in the case of air pressure at various points in the atmosphere. That is called as the what? Representative. And for I will give you one example. We want to understand the infant feeding habits of the mothers. The population is not well defined. We are not told about the background of the mothers. that have to be included in this survey also. After all, maybe the mother from the rural or the urban or the slum background belonging to the different socio-economic groups, adopting the different practices. Hence, to define it accurately, we have to specify the group. Okay, that may be from the urban or the slum mothers, etc. And this would be this is called as the sampling units. And the unit of inquiry is the subject on which the information is obtained. Unit of inquiry means from where you have to subject on which the information is to be obtained. And the sampling unit is one which is used for the selection. This sampling unit is one which is mainly used for the selection. And the second issue is related to the representation of a sample is to decide about the sampling frame. What is the sampling frame? Sampling frame, that is the listening of all the sampling units in the target population. In above the study on stunting, there can be different sampling frame, such as the educated and educated, uneducated, like this. And the sample should be unbiased and objective. While we are selecting the sample, the sample must be, in the earlier class also I already discussed about that, the sample should be unbiased and the objective. Ideally, it should provide all the information about the population from which it has been drawn. Such a sample based on the logic of the induction. Okay. And in the research study are always conducted on a fraction of subject, and all subjects are never observed also. The knowledge, and the chills and fever and the splenomegaly are the very common in malaria, for example, is based on what has been observed in case over a period. But only a fraction of these cases called the sample, or it is called as the that we will taken for the what study purpose. And statistically terminology, this also is a very target the totality of the all subject or the units from which a sample is selected, that is called as the population, where we collect the sample from the population only. When the sample includes large number of subjects, the pictures obtained from one sample is not likely to be very different from the another sample of the same size, because both tend to be fair representatives. Okay, and these this cannot be said for the small sample. The method of sampling, the subjects should be selected in a manner that the wide spectrum could get adequate representation. And what is the parameter and the statistics? What is the we are using for the in the research? What is the parameters and what is the statistics? Most nutritional studies draws mainly conclusion on the basis of the estimate of either means or proportion. That means such quantities of interest are called the parameters. These type of quantities of interest is called as the parameters, and when it is calculated for the entire population and the statistics. And I already told you that there are mainly two methods of sampling. One is the probability sampling. Probability sampling is otherwise called as the what? Random sampling. And the another one is your non-probability sampling. In probability sampling, mainly it is based on the random selection of the units from a group of population. You have to select randomly from the group of population. In other words, the sampling process is not based on the direction of the researcher, but it's mainly carried out in such a way that probability of every units in the population of being included in the same. Okay, I will give you one example. In case of the lottery, if every individual has the equal chance of being selected, yes or no? And some of the characteristics of the probability sample are each unit in the sample has some probability of entering the sample, and the weight appropriate to the probability are mainly used in the analysis of the sample. And the process of sampling is automatic in one or more steps of the selection of units in the sample. Then the simple or on restricted random sampling. What is that? Mainly in the simple random sampling is a method of selecting a sample from a finite population. We will select the sample from a finite number of population in such a way that every units of the population is given an equal chance of being selected. And this type of sampling is called as the unrestricted random sampling, or it is called as the simple sampling. Okay. And this simple random sampling units through the mainly it includes like the simple random sampling is the define the population and make a list of all the units in the population and the number them from 1 to n. That may be 100, that may be 50, that may be, but while you will be that population must be very large, and decide the size of the sample, okay, or the number of units to be included in the sample. Use either the two types of method. Either you can use the lottery method, otherwise you can use the random numbers tables to pick the unit to be included in the sample. And the best method of drawing a sample random sampling is to use a table of random numbers. Okay, from that you have to select the sample randomly. That's why its name is the simple or the unrestricted random sampling. It comes under the probability or the random sampling. In this probability or the random sampling, it mainly in this case, units of population has the same chance of being included in the sample. It is called as the random sampling. And the simple random sampling ensure the best result. The simple random sampling is difficult to realize. And in case of the heterogeneous population, if the population group is not homogeneous, if they are in the heterogeneous nature, this heterogeneous population, a simple random sample may not necessarily represent the characteristic of the total population. And total population. And that even though all the selected units participate in the investigation also. And the disadvantages with this simple random sampling is that it does not guarantee adequate representation of the different segments of the target population. This is the main disadvantages of the simple random sampling. When the adequate representation of the various segments is required, the method of selection should be stratified sampling. Stratified sampling means you have to form the different types of strata. So what is strata? Strata is nothing. Strata means to form the group. Stratified sampling रे हमें group करिबा from the जो गोटे मेंचाए population भितरु हमें ताको strata formation करिबा गोटे group बनेबा and we have to select the sample from that group only. That so its name is that is called as the strata. And what is the stratified sampling? Stratified sampling means the stratified random sampling mainly takes into account the stratification of the main population into a number of subpopulation. That means you have to form the different types of strata, and each of which is the homogeneous with represent to one or more characteristic. Okay, and the selection of the sample from each subpopulation may involve the random or any other mode of selection. And the steps mainly involved in the stratified sampling are deciding upon the relevant stratification criteria, such as the mainly you have to select the strata, like you have to arrange them like sex wise or the geographical region wise or the age wise, course of study wise, and the dividing the total population into the subpopulation based on the stratification criteria. Okay. and you have to divide the total population in the subpopulation. I already told to you, from the population you have to form the strata, and from the strata you have to select the sample, listing the units separately in each subpopulation and selecting the requisite number of units from each subpopulation by using the appropriate random selection techniques. Okay. In And this stratified random sampling is a very useful when list of units or the individual in the population are not available. This type of stratified random sample is very useful when the list of the units or the individual in the population are not available. And it is mainly also useful in the providing the more accurate result than the sample random sampling. जोटा आमे stratified sampling रू जो result माने आमे पाइबा it's give the accurate. Okay, and the procedure for the sampling therefore should be to first divide the subject in the frame by nutritionally status. Okay, the procedure for sampling therefore should be to first divide the subject in the frame by the nutritional status, and that is the that may be normal, moderate, or the malnutrition, and then drawn independent random sample of size, and say 20 from each division. Such division of the frame is called the stratification, and each division is the stratum. Each division is called as the stratum, and the investigator can decide how many units are to be selected from the different strata. And the investigator can decide how many units are to be selected from the different strata. And sometimes the stratification is not possible before collecting the data, and the stratum to which a unit belongs may not be known until the researcher has actually conducted the survey. Okay, sometimes stratification is not possible before collecting the data, and the stratum to which a unit belongs may not be known until the researcher has actually conducted the survey. And the personal characteristics such as the sex and social classes, educational level, age, etc. are the example of stratification criteria. And systematic, what is the systematic sampling? In systematic sampling, mainly the systematic sampling provides a more even spread of the sample over the population. Okay, systematic sampling provides a more even spread of the sample over the population, and leads to the greater precision also. And the systematic random sampling is therefore a sampling method in which the first unit is randomly selected and the other automatically included on the basis of the sampling interval. In the systematic random sampling is therefore the sampling, it is the sampling method in which the first unit is randomly selected and the other automatically included on the basis of the sampling intervals. And the process mainly involves the following steps. Mainly make a list of population units based on some order, that are alphabetically, seniority, or the street number, house number, like this. This is the systematic sampling. And what do you mean by cluster sampling? Cluster sampling means in the cluster sampling is mainly it is used when the population under study is infinite numbers and where a list of units of population does not exist. When the geographic distribution of the units is scattered in nature, and when the sampling or the individual units is not convenient for the several administrative reasons. That is the cluster sampling. In example, mainly for the purpose of the selecting a sample in a study to assess the prevalence of goiter in school children of a state. A researcher must mainly enlist the all schools in the various public health, that is in the PSC area, urban blocks and the census town also, and select randomly a 10% sample of the school or the cluster of the units, and she or he either use all the children as the sample or the randomly select a few of them. Thus, each school constituent a primary sampling units. Okay, and that is a cluster sampling. What is the non-probability sampling? In the non-probability sampling means this, in this type of non-probability sampling mainly is based on the judgment of the researcher. It mainly depends upon the judgment of the researcher, and the guiding the factors in non-probability sampling mainly includes the availability of the units. The guiding factors in non-probability sampling, it mainly includes the availability of the units and the experience of the researcher and his or her convenience in carrying out a survey. Since these samples are not prepared through the random sampling techniques, they are known as the, these type of samples are not prepared through the random sampling techniques. They are known as the non-probability sample. That is called as the non-probability sampling. And these non-probability, depending on the techniques used in the non-probability samples, mainly are classified into the purposive sampling, incidental sampling, quota sampling. Okay, what is the purposive sample? What do you mean by this purposive sample? Purposive sample is the one type of non-probability sampling, and this purposive sampling is one in which non-random component is present and specific subject are intentionally included. In the purposive sample is also known as the judgment sample. This purposive sampling is otherwise called as the judgment sampling. In these type of purposive sampling, the sample is chosen because they are good reason to believe that it is the representatives of the total population. That is called as the purposive sampling. And also in these purposive this type of sampling is chosen because there are the very good reason to believe that it is the representatives of the total population. Out of the group of the population, I mean, what a representative se through choose kariba, that is called as the purposive sampling. In purposive sample mainly different, it is differ from that of the stratified random sampling in that the actual selection of the units to be included in the sample in each group is done purposively rather than by the random method. In the purposive sample mainly differs from that of the stratified random sampling in that the actual selection of the units to be included in the sample in each group is done purposefully rather than that of the random method. And this approach comes in handy where it is necessary to include a very small number of units is called as the sample. I already discussed about the what is sample and what is population. Now I will discuss about the incidental sample. This incidental sample is also the one type of non-probability sampling, and this incidental sample is also known as the accidental sample. This accidental sample is applied to samples that have been drawn because of the easy availability of the units. Okay, it's mainly applied to samples that have been drawn because of the easy availability of the units. That is the in this type of incidental sample, an investigator, mainly an investigator, is employed in the uh, IGNO, for example, may select the learners enrolled for the master degree of the BSc Nursing while conducting a study on higher education, and as the learners are readily available and fulfill the condition of the study. What is quota sampling? Quota sampling means it's the another type of non-probability sampling, that is the quota sampling. It mainly in the quota sampling, it involves the selection of the sample units within the each stratum or the quota on the basis of the judgment of the researcher. Okay. In this type of quota sampling, it mainly involves the selection of the sample or units within each stratum or the quota on the basis of the judgment of the researcher rather than on calculable chances of the individual's units being included in the sample. In this type of quota sampling, in the initial stage, quota sampling is similar to that of the stratified sampling. In stratified sampling, uh, you have to uh, group, you have to strata means you have to very small form the very small group. And in this type of quota sampling, in the initial stage, you have to quota sampling is similar to that of the stratified sampling, and it may not necessarily employ random selection procedure in the initial stage in exactly the same way as the probability sampling. And the quota is usually determined by the proportion of the groups only. The quota is usually determined by the proportion of the groups. And what is the advantages of this sampling, quota sampling? The main advantages of this sampling is it's very less expensive and it is also convenient and more suitable in the case of missing or the incomplete sampling frames. Okay. And the non-probability sampling are generally considered to be convenient when the samples to be selected is small and the researcher wants to get some idea of the population characteristic within a short time. Okay. The non-probability samples are generally considered to be convenient when the samples to be selected is very small and the researcher wants to get some idea of the population characteristic within a short time. What is the characteristic of a good sample? In a sample should have the characteristic like the representativeness and adequacy must be there. What is the representativeness? Representativeness means it is essential that the sample should be representative of the population. If the Mhm. The characteristic of the good sample, the good sample should have the characteristic like the representativeness and the adequacy also. What is representativeness? This representativeness is the mainly essential that the sample should be representative of the population. If the information from the sample is to be generalized for that population. Representative, it is mainly essential that the sample should be representative of the population if the information from the sample is to be generalized for that population. And mainly the representative sample mean an ideal miniature or the replica of the population from which it has been drawn. That is called the representativeness. And the adequacy is the good sample should be also adequate or of sufficient size to allow the confidence in the stability of its characteristic. A good sample should also be adequate or of the sufficient size to allow the confidence in the stability of its characteristic. What is population? What do you mean by population? Just class ପୂର୍ବରୁ ମୁଁ କହୁଥିଲି population କଣ?
Ma'am, a group from which a sample will be drawn.
Very good. Population means population is nothing. Population is a very well defined group of units or the individuals or the object or the attributes or the qualities or the characteristic trait of human beings. That is the population. Okay. Population is defined as the well-defined group of units or the individuals or the objects, attributes, qualities that may be good quality, average quality, bad quality, characteristic, trait of human beings also. Okay. What is sample? Sample is a small representation of a population. Sample is nothing. Sample is a small representation of a population. It is a miniature pictures, okay, of the entire group from which it has been selected. Sample is a small representation of the population. It is a miniature pictures of the entire group from which it has been selected. That is called as the sample. What is sampling? Tell me the sampling method also. Puspanjali. What is sampling method?
Two types of methods. Probability sampling
Tell
and
me the.
non-probability.
Very good. What is the non-probability sampling? What,
Non-probability
what is
sampling.
probability sampling? First, you tell me what do you mean by probability sampling?
Probability sampling means equal chance of selection.
Very good. In the probability types of sampling, the units of the population are not selected at the discretion of the researcher, but by means of certain procedure, and which ensure that every units of the population has the same probability of being included in the sample. That is called as the probability sampling. बुझिएला?
Yes, ma'am.
What is random sampling method? Simple random sampling method. In, on, in random sampling, the systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, multi-stage sampling, and the probability proportion to size sampling are the 6 main types of probability sampling. Okay, 6 types of probability sampling. One is the random sampling, another one is the what? Systematic sampling, third one is the stratified sampling, fourth one is the cluster sampling, multi-stage sampling, and the probability proportion sampling. What do you mean by quota sampling? Quota sampling ଏବେ କହିଥିଲି କ'ଣ quota sampling?
Ma'am, selection of sample within each group.
Each from each quota means what? Each stratum means ଗୋଟେ group
Stratum,
selection କରିବେ. Stratum or the quota. Okay. A quota
stratum.
sampling mainly, yes, very good. A quota sampling mainly involves the selection of the sample units within the each stratum or quota on the basis of the judgment of the researcher rather than on calculate the chance of being included in it. That is the quota sampling. Understood?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the non-probability sampling provides methods? Non-probability sampling is purposive sample, incidental samples, and the quota sample. Okay. What is the बुझिएला राकेश?
Yes, ma'am.
And these non-probability sampling are very convenient in situation where the sample to be selected is very small and the researcher wants to get some idea of the characteristic of population in a shorter time. What is cluster sampling? What is cluster sampling?
Cluster sampling, selecting every element in each selected cluster.
Repeat it again.
Selecting every element.
Cluster sampling हमें finite numbers of population रे नबा ना infinite numbers of population रे नबा.
Infinite, finite.
Very good. No, infinite. A cluster sampling is mainly used when the population under study is infinite. ମୁଁ କହିଥିଲି ପ୍ରଥମରୁ.
Yes.
And where a list of units of the population does not exist, when the geographical distribution of the units is scattered. Okay, infinite number means the geographical distribution of the units is in scattered in manner, or when the sampling of individuals units is not convenient for various practical purposes. And in cluster sampling, mainly it involves the division of the population of elementary units. In cluster sampling, mainly it involves the division of the population of the elementary units into the group of elements or the cluster instead of individuals members or atoms in the population. Cluster sampling mainly involves the division of the population of the elementary units into the group of elements or the cluster instead of individual members or the item in the population. प्रथमରୁ କହିଥିଲି cluster sampling रे कोन करिया population रो group of population रो हमें विभिन्न प्रकार cluster बनेकी group बनेकी सेठु हमें data collection करिबा. In the cluster sampling is very economical, especially when the cost of the measuring a unit is relatively small and the cost of the researching is relatively large also. Okay, and this is the cluster sampling. What is incidental sample? What do you mean by incidental sample? This incidental sample is generally used with those groups which are selected because of the easy or ready availability of the sample units. Okay, this incidental sample is generally used with those groups which are selected because of the easy or the ready availability of the sample units. Okay, and in quota samples mainly it involves the selection of the sample units within each stratum. Okay, in quota sample mainly it involves the selection of the sample units within the each stratum or the quota on the basis of the judgment of the researcher. Judgment of the researcher rather than and calculate the chance of being included. If we will consider about the non-probability sampling, now this non-probability sampling is a very convenient in situation and where the sample to be selected is very small and the researcher wants to get some idea of the characteristic of a population in a very shorter time. That is the non-probability sampling. In non-probability sampling also have a certain limitation also. What is that limitation? No valid generalization can be made beyond the sample studied. And these samples mainly depend exclusively on the uncontrolled factor and the researcher's insight also. The sampling error of such sample is hardly determinable. Okay. The sampling error of such samples is hardly determinable. And this the representativeness and adequacy are the major characteristic of a good sample. The main characteristic of the good sample is the representativeness. What is sampling frame? What do you mean by sampling frame?
Ma'am, listing of all the units in a population.
From which the
Complete.
sample collected and the characteristics of sample is listed.
Very good. That is called the what? Sampling frame. Sampling frame is the means is a complete and updated list of all the units in a group of population. That is called as the sampling frame. Okay. What is the characteristic of a good sample?
Easily available, uh, uh, represent all population, small in
Representative,
group,
yes, yes, representative of the population, children, and adequate, accurate also. Okay. Non-probability sampling includes, tell me the types of non-probability sampling. Yes, Puspanjali? No, Rakesh?
Ma'am, purposive, incidental, snowball, and
ma'am, quota
quota
sampling,
sampling.
Purposive sampling, incidental sampling, quota sampling.
Snow,
Hmm?
snowball
Snowball
sampling.
sampling. Quota sampling
And
mainly involves the selection of sample units within the each stratum. That means selection of sample within each stratum or the quota on the basis of on the basis of judgment of the researcher. And these simple units are not included accidentally or at randomly also. This is all about your types of what is sampling, what is population, what is sample, and categorization of the sampling. Broadly, the sampling is mainly divided into two types. One is the simple random sampling, that is the probability sampling, non-probability sampling. In the probability sampling, there are mainly simple random sampling, cluster random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling. Monroila,
yes, ma'am.
probability sampling now, simple random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and stratified sampling. In non-probability sampling, convenience sampling, snowball sampling, quota sampling, purposive or the judgmental sampling. All of you clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Puspanjali,
yes, ma'am.
କୁହ non-probability sampling कौन कौन हो?
Purposive, quota sampling,
Quota
snowball
sampling,
sampling,
what?
snowball sampling,
Yes, very good.
purposive
Yes,
sampling.
yes.
Our money.
Purposive sampling is otherwise called as the what? Judgmental sampling. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Purposive sampling is otherwise called as the judgmental sampling. And another one is the what? Convenience sampling. Remember, Puspanjali, you left one sampling, that one is convenience sampling. Rakesh, tell me the name of the probability sampling.
Simple random sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, stratified sampling.
Very good. This is all about your method of sampling. Now I will discuss about the research tools. For the research, if we will consider about the research point of view, this research tools is very vital. And what are the questionnaires? How we have to collect the data that is in the questionnaires form, and the rating scale, attitude scales, and the test also. That means these all are the scales of data measurement. What is the characteristic of a good research tools? The characteristic of the good research tools, its validity, its reliability, its usability. And the types of tools and their uses, mainly questionnaires and the schedules, rating scale, attitude scale, test. Data collection is a very important part of the research. Okay, without collecting the data, we will not proceed towards the research work. In order to collect the requisite data now for any theme of research, you have to devise the appropriate tools and use the suitable measuring unit, measuring different types of techniques also. And the mainly commonly used research tools is the questionnaires by the interview method or the observational method, rating scales, attitude scales, and the test. Okay. First, I will discuss about the scales of the data measurement. What is the scales of data measurement? The research tools are the measuring devices. Research tools are the measuring device. And for example, the FPS or the CGS system measures the length in foot or the centimeter, and the weight is measured in pounds or the grams. And the foot rules data measuring length is graduated in the inches. And there are mainly two attributes. One is the each inch each of equal length whenever it appears on the foot rule. And the two different measures at school measures us the 2 inches. For example, by same foot rules are the same length. And a very scale is a very measuring instrument on which the characteristics are measured. Generally, three types of we are using the scales in the epidemiological research. One is the nominal scale, another one is the ordinal scale, and the third one is the metric scale. In the epidemiological research point of view, now if we will be go through the epidemiological research, we are using the three types of scales. One is the nominal scales, ordinal scales, and the metric scales. What is that ordinal scales? Ordinal scales is the second level of scales, which is mainly more sophisticated than that of the nominal scale, and the throw remains in one of the cruder forms. In contrast to the nominal scale, this type of scales consist of ranks or ordering in the categories of a measurement. And mainly disease severity is measured in ordered categories such as non, mild, moderate, serious, or the critical. ଯେତେବେଳେ ବି ଆମେ ଡିଜିଜ ର କଣ୍ଡିସନ କଥା ଆମେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ମେନସନ କରୁଛନ୍ତି କି ଆମେ ମେଜରମେଣ୍ଟ କରୁଛନ୍ତି ଯଦି ଆମେ ଡିଜିଜ କୁ ନେଇକି କିଛି ରିସର୍ଚ୍ଚ କରୁଛନ୍ତି ସେତେବେଳକୁ ଆମେ କଣ କରିବା ରିସର୍ଚ୍ଚ ପର୍ପଜରେ ଆମେ ତାକୁ ସ୍କେଲରେ ମେଜରମେଣ୍ଟ କରିବା we will using the ordinal scale ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ୟୁଜ କରୁଛନ୍ତି ସେ ସମୟରେ ଆମେ ଦେଖିବା ଡିଜିଜ ର କଣ୍ଡିସନ ଏଇଦର ମଡରେଟ ଅଛି ସିଭିୟର ଅଛି କିମ୍ବା ସିରିୟସ ଅଛି କିମ୍ବା କୌଣସି ପ୍ରକାର क्रिटिकल कंडीशन अच्छी किंबा माइल्ड अच्छी किंबा ए सब भीतर किछि नै नॉर्मल भी अच्छी whenever the sample of the research is arranged in ascending or the descending order on the basis of the data on the variables we are using the ordinal scales. Okay, whenever the samples of the research is arranged in ascending order or the descending order. On the basis of the data on the variables, we are using the ordinal scales. Okay. When the students are ranked in a class on the basis of their achievement, we are using the ordinal scales. That means that is the 10th rank in the class of the 50 students is better. The 11th rank but lesser, and the 9th rank, however, that despite the ranking is does not indicate the difference between the 9th, 10th is equal to the difference between the 11th and 12th. This is all about your ordinal scale. In the ordinal scale means you have to ordinal scale mainly it includes the what in ordinal scales you have to measure the moderate, serious or the critical condition of the patients. Okay. What is the metric scale? Metric scale is nothing. Metric scale means the characteristic which can be exactly measured in the terms of the quantity such as the weight, height, hemoglobin level and heart rate are said to be measured on the metric scale only. Okay. In the metric scale, we will use this metric type of scales, the characteristic which can be exactly measured in the terms of the quantity. That is the quantity means the height or the hemoglobin level or the weight of the patient or the heart rate are said to be measured in this type of scale. It is called as the metric scale. All of you understood what I am saying? What is metric scale and what is ordinal scale?
Yes, ma'am.
In the metric scale, mainly the exact measurement on the metric scale are statistically preferable compared to the ordinal measurement. What is the nominal scale? Nominal scale means it is the elementary form of the scale, and as mainly indicated by the name itself, it is only nominal. And this form of scale is largely used to classify the people or the object in certain categories like the male, female, rural, urban. In other words, it is label object of the measurement. Example, the observation such as the gender, either male or female, is nominal. So are the criteria for defining the aplastic anemia from the peripheral blood such as the neutrophils, platelet and the reticulocytes. And the measurement on this scale do not have any specific order also. This type of scale is called as the nominal scale. बुझिएला?
Yes, ma'am.
In the epidemiological research, yes, Puspanjali, are you any doubt?
My mouth ଟିକେ softly voice.
हाँ, मेनली आमे जो एपिडेमियोलॉजिकली रिसर्च करूछंती जो रिसर्च आमे करूछंती सेही रिसर्च को आमे मेजरमेंट करिया पई स्पेसिफिकली तीन टाइप रो स्केल को आमे नउछंती गोटे होची नॉमिनल स्केल आउट होची ऑर्डिनल स्केल आउट होची मेट्रिक स्केल जेते बेले ऑर्डिनल स्केल ता आमे केते बेले यूज करछन जेते बेले गोटे डिजीज होउची आमे से डिजीज को नेकी आमे रिसर्च करछन जेंति कि माने करे एचआईवी आमर एई जियोग्राफिक रीजन रे एते सारा लोक माने बास करते जो मानकर काम है बहुत खराब काम से मो जेहेतु से पाखे अधिक एसटीडी सेक्सुअल ट्रांसमिटेड डिजीज देखा जाए से दे आर वेरी प्रोन टुवर्ड्स द एड्स है तो सही केस रे जतले हम डाटा कलेक्शन कर 100 पेशेंट फ्रॉम द पॉपुलेशन इफ वी विल कलेक्ट द डाटा आउट से ग्रुप ऑफ पॉपुलेशन हम 60 पेशेंट को नौ रिसर्च करने स्टडी करने से भितर आम देखा जे जो 60 लोक नहीं केतेटा पेशेंट रो अति सीवियर अछि बा मॉडरेट अछि किबा वेरी क्रिटिकल कंडीशन अछि किबा नॉर्मल अछि जो स्केल रे हमें मेजरमेंट करिबा दैट टाइप ऑफ स्केल इज कॉल्ड एज द ऑर्डिनल स्केल बुझियला एटा जेतेबेले हमें डिजीज रो सीवियरिटी द डिजीज सीवियरिटी इज मेनली मेजर्ड इन ऑर्डर कैटेगरीज that may be higher, mild, moderate, serious or the critical. Okay. Whenever the sample of the research is arranged in ascending or the descending order on the basis of the data on a variable, we are using this type of ordinal scale. Understood?
Yes, correct.
पुष्पांजलि बुझी पारिला? पुष्पांजलि, are you clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Metric scale hoji, metric scale the mainly metric scale re exactly measured in the terms of the quantity such as the mainly height, weight, hemoglobin level and the heart rate are said to be measured on the metric scale. जोथरे की exact reading टा हमको आसीबो ताकू हमें कहिबा कोन metric scale. जेमति गोटे पेशेंट रो height की weight, हाइट किंबा वेट हाइट तो हम देखुछन हम एक्जेक्टली हम जानछन 5.4 की 5.6 एमिति न हो जे 5.4 और 5.6 भीतर अप्रोक्सीमेट एतिकु रेतिक हबो तो सेठी जो टाइप ऑफ स्केल वी आर यूजिंग ना दैट टाइप ऑफ स्केल इज कॉल्ड एज द मेट्रिक स्केल. बुझिला ना बुझिलानी?
Yes, ma'am.
Similarly, if we will check the heart rate of that patient, then we will got a exact rate. Means either हमें कहउछन 72 अछि कि 69 अछि कि तार 40 अछि कि 50 अछि तो हमें एमती कहउना जे तार हार्ट रेट 50 रो 90 भितरे रहउछि एमती किछि गोटे रेंज हमें कहउछन कि बिल्कुल नहीं. तो that type of measuring units is called as the metric scale. Okay, but in the nominal scale, yes, are you understood, Puspanjali?
Yes, ma'am. Bujhila.
Okay. In the nominal scale is mostly elementary form of the scale. A scale में कौन करूँ ना nominal माने ए ना ही indicate कोची. Mainly this form of scale is largely used to classify the people or the object in certain categories like the male, female हो किंबा जितबेले हमें डाटा कलेक्शन करछन्ती फ्रॉम ए ग्रुप ऑफ पॉपुलेशन सेही थ्रू जितबेले हमें ग्रुप ऑफ पॉपुलेशन रो किछि डाटा नउछन्ती सेठी हमें देखिबा जे मेल एतिक जन को नबा फीमेल जन को नबा अर्बन एरिया रो किछि रिसर्च पाई किछि पॉपुलेशन रो किछि क्लस्टर को ग्रुप वाइज करके सेही थ्रू मध्ये हमें किछि बाछिबा एवं रूरल एरिया रो मध्ये किछि बाछिबा सेमती जो कंपैरिजन वे रे जो दि जन को भितर हमें जो स्केल रे हमें मेजरमेंट करू दैट इज कॉल्ड एज द नॉमिनल स्केल ऑफ एपिडेमियोलॉजिकल रिसर्च. अंडरस्टूड?
Yes, ma'am.
एबे हमें देखिबा व्हाट इज द मेन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक ऑफ ए गुड रिसर्च टूल्स. गुड रिसर्च टूल्स रो मेन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक कोन कोन? The main characteristic of the good research tools is content validity. That means whatever you choose the content of that research na, that must have some validity. Context validity relate to the relevance of the content of the research tools to the objective and the nature of the research problem. Okay, mainly the content of the research tools to the objective and the nature of the research problem. Example, in the case of the test of achievement, for example, nutritional knowledge test, content validity refers to the effectiveness of the test item in measuring the basic nutritional knowledge and estimated by evaluating the relevance of the test item to the instructional objective. The content validity. In these type of content validity of a research tools is mainly based on the judgment of several expert in the field concerned. Carefully analysis of the objective of the subject of the research and the hypothesis. This is the content validity. What is validity?
Value of something which is there is an something limit.
Repeat it again.
Value of something which is for a particular time period.
Validity is the tools which we are using for the collecting the data for the research work and that validity must provide the information that is not only relevant but free from the systematic error. Okay, whatever you are using the validity means that is the one type of tools, and that tools are mainly using for the collection of the data, and that data must provide the information, and that is not only relevant but free from the any kind of systematic error. And the validity mainly three types of validity, like the content validity, criterion related validity, and construct validity. There are mainly three types of validity. One is the content validity, criterion related validity, and the last one is your construct validity. This validity is nothing. Validity is the main tools which are using for the collecting the data, and that must provide the information that is not only relevant but also free from the any kind of systematic errors. That is the validity. What is the criterion related validity? What is that criterion related validity? In this type of criterion related validity, the decision making situation, selection or the classification is mainly based on the individual's expected performance as predicted by the researcher tools. That means what? I will give you an example. In the psychological test or the rating scale which predict the kinds of behavioral, it was intended to predict the, is said to be process predictive validity. And the prediction may be regarding the eating behavior or the feeding behavior. And the validity refers to the association between the present result as indicated by a particular research tools and future behavior. Okay, validity, this criterion related validity is mainly refers to the association between the present result as indicated by a particular research tools and future behavior in order to determine the predictive validity of the tools. And the results from it must be compared with the actual performance or the outcome in the future. That is the criterion related validity. In this type of criterion related validity, the researcher mainly wish to develop a new tools or the substitute for an already existing cumbersome tools also. And these type of empirical check on agreement is called the concurrent validation. Concurrent validation is the information obtained through the two tools or to give nearly the same results. In case of the predictive validity, the measures of the outcome is termed as the criterion. In case of predictive validity, the measures of the outcome is termed as the criterion. Okay. What is reliability? Reliability we are using in the research work. What is that reliability? Reliability is the tools is mainly used for the data collection. Must be reliable. That data collection must be reliable. And that in reliability, thus it is must have been ability to consistently yield the same results when it is repeatedly administered to the same individuals under the same condition. Okay. And in reliability, I will give you an example. If an individual's record his or her response on various items of the questionnaires and thus provides a certain type of information, he or she should provide the approximately the same type of response when the questionnaire is administered to him or her on the second occasion. What is the tools of research? Tools for the research. We are using the different types of tools for the research work. There are the various procedures to assess the reliability of the tools, and these mainly includes the test related method, First one is the test retest method. The tools which are using for the research work is the what? The test retest method. And the second one is the alternate or the parallel form method. And the third one is the rational equivalent method. And the fourth one is your what? The split half method. In the tools for the research, we are using mainly four types of tools we are using in the research work. One is the what? The test retest method, and the second one is your the alternate or the parallel forms method, and the third one is the split half method, and the last one is your rational equivalent method. These are the four types of tools for the research we are using. Rakesh, are you understood what type of four types of tools we are using for the research?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me the name of the four types of tools which are using in the research work.
Retest method, alternate method or parallel form, and rational equivalent method, and split half method.
These all are the four types of method we are using for the research work. What is that rational equivalent method? These type of rational equivalent method, we are mainly through this method, we are measuring the reliability is considered to be free from the limitation of the other methods discussed. Okay. These type of methods of measuring reliability is considered to be the free from the limitation or the other methods discussed so far. What is the split up method? In this method, the tools is first divided into two equivalent halves. Split half means the tools which are using mainly it is first divided into two equivalent halves. It is divided into two parts. If there are 50 items in the test and two equivalent halves are made, that means 25 items in each. It may be done by the having the alternate item also. And the measures of the first half of the tools is correlated with the measures of the other half also. And the measures are correlated to find the reliability of the test are and attitude scales also. What is the equivalent or the parallel forms of method? In the parallel forms of method or the equivalent method, these method mainly requires that two equivalent or the parallel forms of tools to be prepared and the administrated to the same group of subject. And the item in these tests are parallel. And the result in terms of two sets of measures obtained by the use of the tools are correlated to measures the level of its reliability. This is the equivalent or the parallel forms of methods. And the fourth one is the test retest method. What is the test and retest method? We are using the test and retest method. The same tools is re-administrated to the same sample of population shortly after its first administration. And the relationship or the agreement between the information or the data sought through the two administration provides the measures of the reliability of the tools. This is the test and retest method. In this method, the research study to assess the, if we will consider about the hemoglobin, assess the hemoglobin levels, the same subject, and assess the agreement between the two samples and analyzed. The chief disadvantages of this type of method is that if the time between the two administration of the tools is short, the immediate memory effect, practical, and the confidence induced by familiarity with the tools may give a wrong measures of reliability. This is all about your different types of tools we are using for the research. There are mainly four types of tools we are using for the research epidemiological study for the research work. First one is the rational equivalent method, and the second one is your equivalent or the parallel forms of method, and the third one is your split up method, and the last one is your test and the retest method. What is the usability? What do you mean by usability in the research? The usability of the tools mainly depends on its objectivity, cost effectiveness, the time and the effort required to administer it, and how easy it is to analyze and draw conclusion through its use. What's the usability? The usability of a tools mainly depends on its objectivity, cost effectiveness, the time and the effort required to administer it, and how easy it is to analyze and draw conclusion through the use. Now I will discuss about the types of tools and their uses. How many types of tools and their uses? Mainly the tools are the questionnaire and the schedules. Types of tools and their uses. First one, questionnaires and their tools. Questionnaires, interviews, rating, and the attitude scales are the major data gathering research tools. These things are we are mainly using for the data collection and for the data gathering research tools. One is the questionnaires, interviews, rating, and attitude scales. Questionnaire and the schedules. What is the questionnaire and the schedules? The questionnaire is a very commonly used and frequently abused tools for gathering a variety of data. Okay. Questionnaires is a commonly used and frequently abused tools for gathering a variety of data, and questionnaires may include a series of questions for answer by an individuals or groups. Okay. Questionnaires may include a series of questions for answer by an individual or the groups, with the aim of this obtaining relevant data on the topic of the research also. That is the types of questionnaire. The questionnaire we are using during the research now, that may be open-ended questionnaire, that may be structured questionnaire, or the unstructured questionnaire. There are mainly two types of questions we are using for the data collection. One is the structured questionnaire, and the another one is the unstructured questionnaires. What is the structured questionnaire? That structured questionnaires are those which pose definite and concrete questions. Okay. Structures questionnaires are those which poses the definite and the concrete questions. They are mainly prepared well in advance and not on the spot. These type of in the structured questionnaire were asking during the data collection, that type of question must be prepared very earlier, and that question is not asked at the time at the spot or in front of the that in front of the any population. Arsenal questions may be used only when there is a need to clarify vague or inadequate replies by the respondent. Okay. And the form of question may require responses is either closed-ended question or the open-ended question. Okay. There are mainly in the this structured questionnaire is that may be closed-ended or that may be open-ended. What is the open-ended question? Open-ended question means open-ended response, or the open-ended questions means on the other hand are free and spontaneous expression by the respondent to the questions posed to him or her. Okay. In the open-ended response, on the other hand, are free and spontaneous expression by the respondent to the questions posed to him or her. And in open-ended questions, response are used mainly for intensive study of limited numbers of cases. Okay. These open-ended response are mainly used for the intensive study of limited numbers of cases or preliminary exploration of new problems at the situation. That is called as the open-ended questions. Unstructured questionnaire. What is unstructured questionnaire? This unstructured questionnaire are frequently referred to the interview guides. Interview guides means the aim at the precision and the content definite issue that are covered while conducting an interview. in the unstructured questionnaire, this unstructured questionnaire also aimed at precision and contains the definite issue and that are covered while conducting an interview. In this unstructured questionnaire, we are mainly using during the interview, and the flexibility is the chief advantages of the unstructured questionnaire. Okay, it is mainly designated to obtain the opinion, attitude, and it also shows the relationship between the various type of information which might escape and notice under more mechanical types of interrogation. What is the characteristic of a good questionnaire? What is the main?
Ma'am, unstructured, please articulate.
Okay. What do you mean by unstructured questionnaire? These unstructured questionnaire we're using during the research work. They are mainly the main aim of this type of unstructured questionnaire is at precision and contains the definite issue and that are mainly covered while conducting an interview. That means this type of unstructured questionnaire we are using during the interview method, and flexibility is the chief advantages of this unstructured questionnaire. Okay, and it is the various type of information which might escape notice under more mechanical types of interrogation. And what is the characteristic of a good questionnaire? The characteristic of the understood, na Puspanjali, are you understood? Are you got your answer?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is the characteristic of a good questionnaire? The good questionnaire must it contains the characteristic of a good questionnaire can be analyzed by the purpose and the language, frame of the references, and the arrangement of the questions, length of the questionnaire, form of response, and questionnaire. These are the main characteristic of a good questionnaire. That means that must be contains the arrangement of question. What is the arrangement of questions? Arrangement of questions means the characteristic of a good questionnaire is the arrangement of question. The arrangement or the order or the ordering of the question should receive the special attention. It should appear the logical to the respondent. It should appear logical to the respondent, and the question placed first in the questionnaire should be the easiest to answer, and a proper sequence of question proceed from the general to the specific. You have to arrange the question in a very sequence manner, and the sequence of the question proceeds from the general to the specific question, and from simple to the complex one, and from those that will create the valuable attitude to those that may be somewhat delicate or sensitive also. Frame of reference means questions on controversial issue should be broken down into components so that the researcher can determine the respondent feelings about the various aspects of the problems, including those which he or she refused to comment upon. Okay, and the arrangement of the question is also very vital, and the length of the question. The questions should not be longer than necessary, while where the questionnaire should be very short, and the total number of questions must not be too large or too tired or bore the respondent. Okay. If too many questions are asked and the respondent becomes very tired, and the questions at the end of the series may not be well answered. And frame of the references, what is the frame of the references? The respondent frame of references mainly influence his or her answer. The question on the controversial issues should be broken down into the components, and the complex questions that require the respondent to go through several steps of reasoning before answering and undesirable and have often resulted in misleading information. And the form of response means what? The form in which the responses are recorded must be integrated with the forms of the question. That means the question requiring answer like yes or no, and the subject to least bias. These responses are easy to tabulate. However, they do not always yield sufficient information on the subject under study. In such cases, the use of multiple choice responses is desirable. And the questions that present multiple choices to the respondent are effective when the choices are very few and easy to follow. Language. The characteristic of the good questionnaire, the language. The language of the good questionnaire should be concise and directed towards the producing the uniformity of the understanding among the respondent. That means the vague phrases and the expressions should be avoided in the questionnaire. And the technical expressions should be used only if the inquiry is directed to a select group which is well versed in the technical language used. And proverb and questions should be avoided. And the subjective words such as the bad, good, fair, like, dislike do not lend themselves to quantitative measurement, not a qualitative analysis, unless they are used for comparison on a rating scale. What is the characteristic of a good questionnaire? Purpose means the good questionnaire must serve two purposes. First thing is that it must translate the objective of an investigator into specific question only, and the answer to which will provide the data necessary to test the hypothesis and explore the area defined by the objective. And the second one is the questionnaire must motivate the respondent to communicate the required information. Okay. The second questionnaire must motivate the respondent to communicate the required information. And it is essential to include a courteous and careful constructed covering letter to explain the purpose and the importance of the study. What is the questionnaire pre-testing? Questionnaire pre-testing means in questionnaire pre-testing, these kind of study now mainly the small number of subject is called the if we will take the small number of subject, it's called the pilot study, or this can reveals that the questions are very sufficiently clear or not, whether the length of the interviews is within the limit or not, or whether the instruction are very adequate or not. We have learned that the pre-testing the questionnaire is a very important aspect in the use of the questionnaire as a research tools. And what is the limitation of the questionnaires? The limitation of the questionnaire means the limitation of the questionnaire mainly includes the questionnaire cannot be used to be children and the illiterate. And the questionnaire, it is the sometimes difficult to formulate and phrase questions on certain complex and delicate problems. There is no check on the respondent who misinterpret a question or gives incomplete or the indefinite responses. And the questionnaire, the limitation of the questionnaire, if the questionnaire is self-administrated, the education, the attitude of the respondent towards the survey can substantially influence the responses. And sometimes the respondent may modify his or her earlier original responses to the questions when he or she finds the his or her responses to later questions are contraindicated the previous one also. What is rating scale? What do you mean by rating scale? Rating scale is nothing. Rating scale is the evaluation, the assessment of something. And in terms of the quality, quantity, or the some contribution of both of the rating scale mainly refers to the scale with a series of points which describe varying degree of an attribute under the investigation. Rating is the mainly it is a term applied to the expression of opinion or judgment regarding the some situation, object, character, or an attribute. The rating scale can be broadly classified into 5 categories. The rating scale may be numerical scales, may be graphic scales, standard scales, force choice rating scale, or the rating by the cumulative points also. There are different types of rating scale. One is the numerical scales. Another one is the graphical scale. Graphical scale is otherwise called as the graphic scale. Third one is the force choice rating scale. And fourth one is the standard scale. And the last one is your rating by the cumulative points. These all are the different types of rating scale we are using for the research methodology. What is that numerical scale and what is graphic scale? That numerical scales we are using for the very numerical scale is the sequence of defined number is mainly supplied to the rector or the observer. That means he assigned to each stimulus to be rated an appropriate number in lines with this definition or description of the event or the stimulation. That is the numerical scale. That means uh, if we will consider about the disease, otherwise, or if we will consider about the, I will give you an example. The rating of the effective value of the sensory testing of food product with the individuals. The sensory testing of food product with the individual. Most pleasant, imaginable, most pleasant, extremely pleasant, moderately pleasant, and mildly pleasant or indifferent. This type of scale is called as the numerical scale. And these numerical rating scales are the easiest to be constructed, and they are also be very simplest in terms of handling the result also. These numerical scales have the limitation of the biases. What is the graphic scale? Graphic scale means this graphic scale is the most popular and the most widely used type of rating scale. And in this type of scale, a straight line is shown vertically or the horizontally with various clues of help the rate. And the line is either segmented into units or continuous also. What is standard scale? The standard scales means standard scales is the set of standard in presented to the rater. And the standard are the usually object of the same kind to be rated with pre-established scale value. And this type is like that of the scales for judging the quality of the handwriting. This is the standard scale of rating we are using for the research methodology. And rating by the cumulated point. That means in the cumulated point means the unique and the distinctive features of the rating by cumulative points is it's mainly immense use and easy of the scoring also. This rating score for an attribute or an object or an individual is the sum or the average of the weighted or the underweighted points. In the cumulated points means the rating or the score for an attribute, object or the individuals in the sum or the average of the weighted or underweight points. Okay. This is the rating by the cumulated points. Force choice rating. Force choice rating means in the force choice rating methods, the rater is asked not to say whether the rate has a certain trait or how much of it the rate has, but to essentially say whether he or she has some or one trait or another of a pair also. This is the force choice rating. Why you are using this rating scale? What is the main using of this uses of this rating scale? These rating methods mainly consume much less time than the other method of scaling, like the pair comparison or the rank ordering. Okay. And the rating method, the quite interesting to the rates, especially if graphic methods are used. And the rating methods can be used with a larger number of stimuli. And the rating scale can be used with a large number of stimuli to the rater at a time also. What is the limitation of the rating scale? Mainly the rating scales have the several limitations, and one is the error of leniency and the effort of central tendency and the logical error, the contrast error, the proximity error, and the last one is the halo effect. What is that halo effect? Halo effect is an error which mainly obscures the cluster of trend within an individual. That is the halo effect. Tomorrow I will discuss about this limitation of the rating scale and why you are using this rating scale briefly. Puspanjali?
To measure, to know the improvement or decrement of the situation and the result of application of the research.
Decrement. What is decrement? Is there any word for the decrement? Decreases, not decrement.
Yes.
Okay. તમે કોણ કરો પુષ્પાંજલિ?
ମ୍ୟାମ୍ ମୁଁ ଲେକ୍ଚର ଅଛି ମ୍ୟାମ୍।
କୋଉଥିରେ?
ମ୍ୟାମ୍ BSc ନର୍ସିଂ କମ୍ପ୍ଲିଟ୍ ହେଇଛି, ଆଫ୍ଟର ଦ୍ୟାଟ୍ ଗୋଟେ କଲେଜରେ ଲେକ୍ଚର ଅଛି।
କୋଉ କଲେଜ?
ମ୍ୟାମ୍ ବରହମପୁର ଅମିତ କଲେଜ ଅଫ୍ ନର୍ସିଂ।
ଆଚ୍ଛା ଆଚ୍ଛା। That means you are staying at Barampur.
Yes ma'am.
And you are also doing this course also, na?
Yes ma'am, that is the side course I am joining, but I have so many problems to attend the classes sometimes, so I just keep for somewhere.
Okay, tomorrow I will talk with you. Actually ମୋର ଏବେ ଟାଇମ ହେଲାଣି ହସ୍ପିଟାଲ, ମୁଁ ବାହାରୁଛି, ଓପିଡି ଯିବାର ଅଛି।
Okay ma'am.
Thank you all of you. Tomorrow I will discuss.
Thank
Yes,
you, ma'am.